I have to tell you, I'm honored to be joined today by Kevin Lacz. He is the author of The Last Punisher, a SEAL Team 3 sniper's true account of the Battle of Ramadi. He served with SEAL Team 3 as a sniper, breacher, and a medic on 2 combat deployments in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He received a Bronze Star with Valor and 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals for his service. He served with Chris Kyle, the subject of the movie American Sniper, and he also starred in that movie, playing himself. And he joins me on the podcast to talk about his real experience serving in the Iraq War, about his experience on American Sniper, about Chris Kyle and the other members of SEAL Team 3 that he served with, about veterans issues, and a charity that he has, Hunting for Healing. Kevin, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Bruce, thanks for having me.
Every war generates a few significant books. For the Civil War, and we talked about on the podcast, The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane is one of those that just makes soldiers who served in the war weep because it was so vivid. I think the competition will be open for the Iraq War about which book will rise and give readers the real picture of the war because it's sorely needed. And I believe your book is a contender, and I think it's a significant contribution. But you note in the book how there was a time where you were a Mohawk sporting college student and you transformed yourself into a decorated Navy SEAL and now a physician assistant and public speaker. Can you describe the change?
I appreciate you putting our book up there with some of the best. You know, we wanted to tell a real war story, something that doesn't walk the line of embellishment or hyperbole, and we wanted to give the reader a true sense of what it's like to be in combat. And I think some books out there, particularly some SEAL books, state that I'm a badass and there's no way you're going to be this person. And I don't think that's necessarily true all the time. So we wanted to tell that real war story. But, my transformation, I guess it's more of a transformation than really, a change. It's a change to some degree, but I've always had characteristics there that, have led me to where I am in life. But, I wanted to, growing up, I grew up in Connecticut in a very small town, and both my parents worked very hard to put me and my 2 brothers to school, and none of them had gone to a 4-year school. And I wanted to be different and go to college and become a doctor. And I did well in undergrad and got a spot at James Madison University in Virginia, where I was a triple major with, chicks, booze, and rugby. And my first semester's GPA was a 0.7. So, if you look at that compared to being a SEAL, I definitely wasn't excelling my first semester, and my parents definitely, did not feel like I was excelling. And I had a change in my life, and it wasn't, a wake-up call from a couple failed grades. It was more deeper than that. It was 9/11 that, hit me pretty close to home. My friend's father was killed in the Trade Center, and being located in Virginia, a lot of classmates and family members that were at the Pentagon. And I looked at my lot in life and where I was and asked myself, was I maximizing, my experiences, and was I being as good as my potential has told me in the past? And the answer was no. So I went down to the recruiting office after my friend's father's memorial service and looked at the wall and saw a poster on the wall and saw a SEAL poster particularly, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a Navy SEAL for the sole reason to go down range and engage the enemy. It kind of took some people as a shock, that I wanted to be a team guy, but, I looked at what I was doing, rather what I wasn't doing, and it wasn't good enough for me. And I saw an outlet as being a SEAL.
And the training's intense. You talk about that a lot in the book, but it has 2 components. One is to really transform you and sharpen your skills, but the other is to weed people out who just aren't going to be Navy SEALs.
Yeah, I really didn't want to dedicate too much of the book to the training because it's been done. They've skinned the cat a million times. I don't want to do a million and one, so I kept it kind of brief. But the training it's intense. It helps weed out the 85% of those who aren't supposed to be there. And that's no disrespect for those who don't make it through SEAL training. I know a lot of guys who've gotten out who haven't made it through training that have done very well with their lives. And there's no less of a man if you don't make it through SEAL training. It's a volunteer service on top of a volunteer military. The teams, particularly basic underwater demolition SEAL training, makes you tap into qualities that you possess that a lot of others suppress. And I think those qualities are the ones that make you exceptional in instances that it's needed, particularly combat. And I feel like I've always had a lot of those characteristics, used them a little bit, but not to the degree that the SEAL teams required. And it was BUD/S that brought a lot of those to the surface, and a lot of those which I carry to this day.
Your complete training was about 4 years before you were then deployed to Ramadi.
Yeah, that's frustrating. When you join right after 9/11 and you want to get to war and you're stuck in training school after training school. I finished BUD/S. I had a back injury. I got rolled back 2 months and finished with the follow-on class 246. Then I went to jump school with the Army, learned basic static line, and then went to SEAL qualification training, which is basic, almost like combat infantry school for the Navy. You get a bunch of sailors who had never really patrolled or done a lot of these things, and you tend to build on these basics. And following SEAL training or SEAL qualification training, I went to the Army 18 Delta Medic program, the Special Operations Combat Medic, whereas the majority of our class went to East and West Coast SEAL teams, and I was sent to yet another school. And as a 21-year-old kid at that time, I was frustrated. I wanted to be at a platoon. I wanted to go to combat, and I had my peers going and doing that, and I was stuck at another school. But I learned at that school, in addition to the basics of combat medicine under fire, I learned characteristics about myself, and that's ownership in stressful situations and being calm in stressful situations that have helped, help me get to where I'm at as a physician assistant, in medicine now. So all wasn't lost in those 7 months. And following that training, I went to SEAL Team 3, where I actually got some combat.
You were participated in the preparatory part of the pre-part of what might be commonly known by people here as the Surge. You were in Anbar Province, and Ramadi being the major city and the most dangerous city in the world at that time. I mean, what was it like to go from training to be transported right in?
It's something that you train for all the time and you dream about getting into. I remember getting to the team, and there were guys who were getting close to retirement that had never shot their gun in combat. And they were frustrated. So having the opportunity to get to combat, intense combat, your first deployment is, they don't write scripts that better than that. And you're right. It was the pre-surge. We had changed a lot of the models of how we would engage Al-Qaeda at that time to more of a tribal engagement, which is how Ramadi played out in a lot of those towns in western Iraq and the Anbar province. We would use our skill sets, direct action missions, sniper, overwatch, etc., in addition to winning the hearts and minds and showing the locals that not only are we going to smash the enemy that's ravaging both coalition forces and the local populace, but we're going to help stabilize that region and allow for the potential to self-government long after we leave. And as that surge rolled through, you saw a lot of those imprints for a little bit after coalition forces left.
I think one of the really important reasons to read books that are written by those who are in the field is people in political discussions or talking about foreign policy or what we decide to do as voters or what we urge our leaders to do. It's always very in such simplistic terms, I'm for the war, I'm against the war, we shouldn't do this, we should do that. And I think it's important to see the nuances and the dimensions of it. It's like not just about do we fight a war, but how do we fight it? And something like your book kind of reveals different strategies. For instance, you mentioned that David Petraeus' strategy was clear, hold, and build. You were the clear part.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that's the way, our society's evolved. I mean, you look at ESPN, for example. I mean, there are talk shows that talk about other talk shows and analyze other talk shows.
Right.
And if you really want to make the discussion as who's better, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, why don't you put their films side by side and watch them yourselves? And I feel the same has evolved with our politics, and particularly how we engage in foreign policy. The talking heads at 9 Eastern aren't going to tell you how we're really fighting the war. They're going to stoke your inner passions. You're going to get how wars are conducted from the spoken word and the written word from those who have actually been there. And part of the strategy that we use that a lot in the media won't let you hear is that we were very successful in what we did. And Ramadi was one of those models of success, where we were a part of first the 506th, the Army and the Marines, and we were part of that clear phase. And that clear phase involved destroying the enemy, plainly speaking, while minimizing casualties and collateral, to show them that our focus is the enemy and not an Iraqi city as a whole. And, the hold is the occupancy, and then the build is building the, not only the external structure, but the infrastructure, which comes through security. That's crucial in that clear phase.
And one of the problems is if they're trying to do build or hold before there's a clear, it goes without saying that there's going to be people in there who don't have good intentions disrupting everything.
Absolutely. I mean, war is violent. It has to be. And in that process of clearing, you're engaging, some very nefarious characters, heinous, evil people. And it has to be very swift and decisive. And I think the more waffling that happens, the more instability you set the stage for later on. And fortunately, the Marines and the Army that we worked with, they didn't hesitate. Neither did we. And we were able to, with ruthless accuracy, target the enemy and really, put a damper on their day to the point that Ramadi was giving a opportunity, which it did for a short period of time, to be free, be safe, and then set itself up for, hopefully, which, hasn't occurred in recent years, a long-term success.
As you were noting in your book that you even felt that the Iraqi army that you had served with, and in the beginning, they were very spirited, but you had to help them a bit, and you felt that they were even getting better.
When we go overseas and we work to train local militias or armies, special operations groups, I mean, it results in on-the-job training, which means eventually you're going to have to go out into, the enemy's area, outside the wire, and use the skill sets. And if you didn't train these people properly, it's a liability because they may not cover their six and you may get shot at. And we took our training very seriously. And at first, the Jundis were a little slow to react. There's the language barrier, there's a culture barrier. But as we engaged in combat and both sides lost, soldiers, the Jundis and us, they realized that we all have the same skin in the game. And after that learning curve was right up on par, and those guys carried their weight.
And when you operated, and it's often maybe a perception that people may have of a sniper, is like, well, they're hidden and the enemy can't see them. So that's obviously a very aggressive, offensive military stance. But it might be misunderstood by some folks, and you talk about this in the book. I mean, you have rules of engagement that you operate by. For instance, someone has a weapon. Someone even having a cell phone, if they're taking a certain amount of peeks at your position, they're now in it. Or someone making a booby trap or device like that. So there's many rules of engagement that you operate by in order to accomplish that clear phase.
Yes, and any military, from the United States can be any part of the military from the U.S. can be as savage as you want or as docile as a lapdog. And it really stems from the rules of engagements that are put forth by politicians. Fortunately, the rules of engagements that we received in the mid-2000s in Iraq were very bent on winning. And what that translated down to the operator with the gun was, if it's a hostile target and there is direct or indirect threats, you're able to engage, hostile intent versus hostile action. And that means to the operator, if I see a guy with a gun, then, that's a green-lit target right there. If I see a potential enemy combatant with a cell phone, pointing out positions, or with, binoculars pointing out positions, or setting up mortar tubes, or directing, coordinated attacks, that is hostile intent, which deems, hostile action on our part. And that means, what that boils down to for us is you have to be good at your job, because we're not a lawnmower that cuts every single blade of grass out there. That's not how we operate. We're not savage like the enemy is. What we are is we're very skilled surgical units that are able to differentiate the hostile intent versus hostile action versus non-combatants. And how we were able to win, the job on the streets was killing the enemy. How we were able to win the PR war was not killing innocent civilians indiscriminately. And that is how you beat an enemy. One, at the game that they, bring to you, which is hostile intent, hostile action, and two, the PR war, which they can't put on Al Jazeera and say they're killing our civilians.
And you did accomplish missions like rescuing kidnapped victims of important people.
Correct. I mean, we rescued the police chief's son, who was captured by Al Qaeda. They took him to Syria, and then brought him back into Iraq, and we snatched him in downtown Ramadi. He was up on a rooftop, and we went in there and snatched him. And that's the thing, is like there's so many stories that go to you go into the history of the Iraq War and the bond that has been formed between the American military and not only the Iraqi military, but even Iraqi civilians. I can guarantee you that police chief's son that we rescued in 2006, was definitely a big supporter of what we did, when given faced with the savage nature of his captors.
You carried the American flag with you into battle every day.
I did. I did for a couple different reasons. I carried it, with the intention of one day flying it and then presenting it to my family. I carried it as a backup via 17 panel in case I lose mine. And there was always that opportunity to intimidate the enemy, and we used that in one opportunity while our foot patrol on the ground was taking effective fire. Our sniper Overwatch, which couldn't get a clear line of sight of the enemy, wanted them to move a little bit. So we simply attached the American flag to a pole and started flying it over our position, which mission accomplished, directed enemy fire, and took it away from our guys on the ground, and we were able to work on engage the aggressors.
I noticed that there's all of these they seem like small things that you read in the book, but I think they seem so important, and they could be life lessons really for everyone. Things like take care of your gear, and it will take care of you. You always seem to be adjusting gear all throughout your experience. Or complacency kills.
Exactly. My son comes home after fishing and wants to just chunk his fishing rod in the corner of the garage and wait. Hopefully next time it works the same way it did that first time, and I have to show him that there are things you need to take care of, because eventually you may come to rely on these things, and if you don't take care of them previously, they say a previous proper planning prevents a piss poor performance. I have to let them know that you prep your gear because you're going to need it later on down the road. And that's true. And, it's basic. Everybody knows that. But complacency, it's not just if I get complacent on the battlefield, I'm going to die. That's an opportunity. That's a possibility. But, I look at it as a healthcare provider. If I get complacent in my job and I don't take each interaction, each time I deal with a patient with the same vigor I did that first time that I spoke to them or I interacted with them, well, I could miss something, and that can be detrimental to the patient. It can be applied to every single aspect of your life. And I think, being in combat makes you an active participant in life compared to a passive passenger who's more susceptible to environmental factors. And, being in combat heightens your situational awareness, and I think it prepares you better for the unknown, whereas the opposite is for those that are complacent.
And a reminder that I'm talking with Kevin Lacz, the author of The Last Punisher, a SEAL Team 3 sniper's true account of the Battle of Ramadi. He also served with Chris Kyle, the subject of the movie American Sniper, and Kevin starred in that movie playing himself. What was it like then to go from having served the deployments in Ramadi back to civilian life?
Yeah, it's a pretty smooth transition. I've been a very linear thinker my entire life, and I set, I prep the next thing, while I'm finishing up something else. And, the next logical step was, I met my wife while I was in the Navy, and I joined in 2002 with I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to engage the enemy. I wanted to go to war. I did 2 combat deployments. I checked every box that I wanted to, and I felt that the next step was to go back to school and pick up on something I had dropped before. So I applied to school. I wrote my entry letter to the University of Connecticut while I was in combat, and on the Syrian border town in western Iraq. Just stating, I know I was a derelict my first time, but I've learned a lot these last 7 years. I'd love the opportunities in the institution. And somebody did the admittance office. I never met them. They bought it and they took me on, and I got a spot at UConn. So not 3 months after getting out of the Navy, 4 months after getting out of combat, I was enrolled at UConn, and it was seamless to the point where I felt comfortable in this next step, and then I felt uncomfortable being with a bunch of, that movie Billy Madison where he goes back to school,
of course,
and he's stuck with like the kindergartners.
Right.
Yeah, that was kind of like how I felt when we were back in the classroom, and I'm dealing with children who'd never experienced real life or war or healthcare or any of those things that I dealt with on a daily basis. And then I felt like I had made the wrong choice. But like I said, I'd met my wife, and she reassured and kept me strong in a lot of those moments where I felt weak and I didn't know I was doing the right thing. Because I had buddies who were still, in the teams. I had friends who, had been there when Operation Neptune Spear occurred and guys had got bin Laden. The same reason why I joined the Navy. And I wondered, is being a college student and then becoming a PA, is this the right course? Where I was great at being a SEAL, why didn't I stay in? But I saw the forest for the trees, and continued my undergrad and then went to grad school, and here I am today as a PA.
And your wife helped you with the book.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we were putting this thing together, Ethan and I got together and did a bunch of interviewing and writing, and it came across as, Ethan's a fantastic writer, but it came across as being a very guy-oriented thing. And Lindsay, her interjections and her queries and questions were so specific, and they brought so much to the book. Like, what did you feel in this situation? And sometimes I felt nothing, and she's like, you need to convey that you felt nothing in this situation. Or I had a lot of emotion, and I felt that made the book more robust, and it increased the readership of the book, because it's not just a war memoir. It also has the reader think a little bit. How does this theme relate to my life? And also the chapter introductions were Lindsay's, and they set the theme for the book. So not only was she spectacular in, keeping me focused after I got out of the military, she's been my partner in crime, and she's a fantastic co-writer for this book.
Well, I think the contributions work, because I really do think this book puts the reader in it. It's certainly not fiction, but it has the dramatic elements, like, we're going up the stairs with you, and we don't know what we're going to find on that rooftop. Your wife also was the one that contacted the writer, I believe, for American Sniper.
Yeah, she got me into that mess, so I keep telling her it's all your fault. So I was enrolled at Wake Forest Wake Forest, and I was starting PA school in late June while Lindsay was still in Connecticut finishing up teaching. She was teaching high school history. And I moved down early so I could get set. I moved all the worldly possessions we had into our rental house in North Carolina. I left Lindsay in Connecticut with our son, a laptop, and an air mattress in the house that we still own. So she happens to be on Facebook or whatever social media site and saw that Bradley Cooper's production company had bought the rights to American Sniper, and it had stated that Jason Hall was listed as the screenwriter for the movie. So she went on Facebook and found Jason Hall, and there was a ton of Jason Halls, but only one had recently liked American Sniper, the Facebook page. So she sent him a message, shot in the dark, and said, hey, this is a real personal story, and she used a little more colorful language. She's like, don't mess this up. So Jason was inquisitive and said, well, I really want to get this story right, so help me, don't mess this up. So they had a correspondence for about 2 months till Lindsay came down to North Carolina. And we're sitting there having breakfast one morning, and I'm drinking my coffee, and she tells me, she's like, hey, I met somebody. And I was like, say again? She's like, no, it's all right. I met somebody online, and it's cool. They're in Hollywood. And I was like, well, you really don't know what I used to do. And she's like, no, it's fine. His name is Jason Hall. He's writing the screenplay of American Sniper, and he wants to talk to you about, your role in that and in real life. And I was, I had to text Chris and be like, hey, is this Hall guy all right? And Chris Kyle was like, yeah, Jason's fine. Why don't you talk to him? And that's how our relationship started, talking about Mark Lee and Ryan Joe to Jason and helping Jason understand Chris, because Chris was working with his company Kraft. And the three of us worked on Sniper until Friday before Chris was murdered, the day before Chris was murdered. And that was when Jason finished the screenplay and delivered it to the producers. And the next day, Chris went to the range in Glenrose and was murdered. So Chris never got to read the first or any of the scripts of American Sniper. So invited Jason to come down to Texas and see the funeral and meet a lot of team guys, and he did, and got a better understanding. And a lot of that, became the backbone of the movie American Sniper. When you watch it and you see the real life stuff at the end, and the funeral procession, that was all filmed with his iPhone. So Jason gets back to California, starts telling these producers, like, yeah, I had a great time. I met this guy Dauber. He's been working with me. He'd make a great technical advisor. And Bradley thought it was a great idea, so we set up a training days where I'd go teach him how to shoot. Spielberg was going to direct, and then Clint Eastwood eventually, signs on, and I fly out to California. I meet Clint, have like a day-long interview with him, and then I go to the range the next day with Cooper, and we're on the range, and he's like, hey, you ever think about playing yourself in the movie? And I was like, no. Actually, I'm not one of those, artsy kids. I didn't do any drama. He's like, no, it's fine. I'll teach you how to do it. You just audition. And I was like, let's get Chris Kyle's character correct, and then I'll consider that. Long story short, the casting director sent me the sides. Well, after I went back to North Carolina, back to grad school, I auditioned on an iPhone. My wife filmed me. We sent it into the casting director. He called back 2 days later and said I showed the tapes to Clint. He loved it. He said, boy's damn good. Get him a job. And next thing you know, 2 weeks later, I'm in Morocco filming American Sniper.
What was it like going from having done this to being in a movie, playing the role that you had done in real life?
Bruce, the question you should be asking is how is it feeling like going from a full-time grad program right onto a movie set? And it was crazy. I'm in my neuro psych block of physician assistant school at Wake Forest, and then next thing you know, I'm at a movie set in Morocco filming the combat scenes that you see in American Sniper. I mean, it wasn't that much of a difference. It was a huge difference, but it wasn't as dramatic as like a lot of people infer. There's a big difference between combat and movie set. When you're in combat, you better have a Camelback. You're not going to drink any water. If you're on a movie set, you just got to whistle to the production assistant who's going to run you over a bottle of water. So the differences are stark. But I think a lot of people brought a lot to the American Sniper set. I feel my contribution was with the actors, coaching them and teaching them, how combat actually goes and why this movie is important, because these individuals not only had a big, part of my life, Mark Lee, Ryan Jobe, Mike Mansour, Chris Kyle, but a lot of SEALs and a lot of people who were on the streets while we were in the sniper overwatches who, a lot of them come forth and said, Chris saved their life in a lot of occasions. Those people, this story is about them. Mm-hmm. And, my job was simply to convey to them what that bond means to a lot of people, and so that they can take their actions and bring their A game to the silver screen, and they did.
Talk a bit about Chris Kyle, the other people that you served with, what they were really like. Did the movie do them justice?
SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon, Tasking and Bruiser, I mean, it's just a phenomenal set of individuals. Obviously, people know about Chris and his, what he's done. You read American Sniper, read about the 200 some odd confirmed kills he had, and a lot of people see that. Chris was my friend, so I saw him it's weird to see and hear your friend as a household name. But Chris was a down-to-earth guy who had a very amazing skill set and was able to teach people around him how to be at the level he was. And that in turn made us snipers and our team more effective in combat. Mark Lee and Ryan Joe were fantastic new guys that, I cut my teeth with at the teams. We grew up together, and, unfortunately Mark, spent his last hours, days, minutes next to me in a crappy house in Iraq in Ramadi, when he was killed on August 2nd. And Ryan Job was injured that day, and unfortunately Ryan died as a result of surgery in 2009. So, those guys to see them come to life on the big screen is great, because people are hearing those stories. Mike Mansour was our sister platoon mate in Delta Platoon, who jumped on a grenade and received the Medal of Honor. So guys have, become these mythical people based on their actions, and having known them as, hey, that's Mike, or that's Mark, or that's Biggles, it's kind of surreal. And, more recently, my fellow medic in Charlie Platoon, Johnny Kim, just got selected to the astronaut program. So he went from being a SEAL to USD to Harvard Med, and just got picked up for the astronaut program. So to see the enlisted guys just absolutely set these, huge standards and meet them and go beyond that has been incredible. It's been humbling, and it goes back to, the teams and the people that you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with the right people, they will push you harder and harder to make yourself better. And together you make a fantastic team. And that's what we did.
One of the things I read, I believe it was in the Navy Times, that you had said is that, and it just goes to how we react. Sometimes you'll have people who might say, thank you for your service. But what you didn't like is if they said something like, I'm sorry you had to go through all that. And your reaction was, sorry, this was a great experience in my life.
Yeah, that's kind of the impetus of why we wrote The Last Punisher. I got done with Sniper, and I had friends of mine that I grew up with who said exactly that. Thanks for your service, and I'm sorry you had to go through all that. And I didn't know what I should do, is like default and like knock them out real quick and make sure they're okay, or educate them and say, this is something I wanted to do. Like, while you stayed in college, like, I wanted to be a team guy. I wanted to go to combat, and I understood the risk associated with that. And I felt those questions were kind of a microcosm of the greater narrative with veterans. And I think, like I said, to write a book, I never wanted to write a SEAL book. I never thought that my life was, kind of book worthy. But I felt when I read these different accounts that nobody was addressing, the elephant in the room, which is everybody thinks that if you go overseas, you're going to have PTSD, and that is very detrimental to veterans in general. So when writing the book, we don't take anything away from people who have PTSD. PTSD is very real. It affects about 20% of veterans coming back. I have friends who have PTSD, and I know it's not something to gloss over. But I do believe that, are we addressing it correctly? And I feel, we don't in a lot of ways. And I feel a lot of that is very close to home. Chris Kyle was murdered by a guy who the media initially painted out to be somebody with PTSD, not the guy who's on drugs that's crazy, narrative. Because, man, it's easier to talk about veterans with PTSD than to call out a national drug problem or the mental health conditions in this country. That's a bigger issue. So let's just focus on PTSD. So I felt like we are not addressing the issues correctly. So in writing this book, I want to talk about the 80% who go to combat and come back and don't suffer the effects of PTSD, because people with and without PTSD are doing great things each and every day to further veterans and to further, people who have been in these situations and may not have been in combat, but they're first responders or law enforcement, and they do a lot of great things every day. So when we look at how we treat people with PTSD, I think we're making a lot of efforts. There's a lot of focus on, those who take their lives each day. The 22 kill movement, they talk about that. But I feel that, as a healthcare provider, and I say this very objectively as a healthcare provider and as a veteran, that, the help is available. If you call the VA right now and they say, are you in a crisis, you call 911, and, there is so much help out there. And we do the best that we can. It comes down also to the individual. Do you want help? And that's where the humanism comes in. Like, either I'm an individual and I don't want help, or I do want help. So I believe we have met that in a lot of different ways. I've seen how employers have stepped out and made, employment easier for veterans. And then I've seen veterans mess it all up. And, that's their own fault. And it's unfortunate because there are people that go out of their way to do great things for veterans, and then veterans undo it, and we all get lumped into that one group. So it comes down to the individual. Do you want help or not? Are you going to go ahead and make a good name for veterans or not?
And anything that individual people should be doing, both in how we behave towards veterans, but also what we might want to advocate to our elected officials.
Yeah, I mean, we're not monsters that have hands growing out of our face or anything like that. I think, I think it begins with, the honest talk about the military. I'm from a state, where you're in Jersey, right?
Jersey, yeah.
Connecticut, New Jersey, you join the military, it's kind of like, ooh, what happened to that guy? Like, why is he going in the military? And there aren't very many people I know from Connecticut that joined the military. One of my grooms in my wedding was a SEAL officer from Jersey, but he's like one of the only guys I know from Jersey that joined the military. It comes down to honest conversation. There's nothing wrong with joining the military. I've gone ahead. If you put me side by side with people I went to college with initially, I've superseded them in a lot of different ways, and so have my peers that have joined the military. And I think you gain life lessons that a lot of people will never have if they don't join the military and do that. And I think having an honest conversation, saying there's nothing wrong with the military, it's a great way to, improve your life and go beyond and learn more about yourself. And that fixes the narrative on how we address veterans, because if you're from that population of, ooh, why'd you join the military? Then we see veterans as that group as, how do we fix those people? Or how do we help those people? Because they're not really those people, they're us, aren't they not? So I think it begins with how we view people who join the military, how we promote the military, and how we support the military, both in war and then also on the home front. I've seen great things. I do a lot of speeches with companies who are veteran friendly. I believe there are initiatives made each and every day that make it easier for veterans, but I think at the same time, we don't look for handouts as veterans. I want to, when I apply to physician assistant school, whether it's Duke, Emory, or Wake Forest, I want to be judged not just because I'm a veteran, but how smart am I, and am I really going to pass this program? And I think that comes up to the veteran, where it's time that you stepped up to the plate when you're in combat, step up to the plate when you get out, and set the standard like you continue to do. And I'm proud to call myself a veteran, and I see veterans doing great things every day.
In magazines, those articles on great CEOs and titans of industry, but when people need to also look at what this person accomplished in the military, this might be a person that's going to handle those challenges extremely well.
You're absolutely right. And, I'm, like I said, I remember, looking at some of my peers when I, shut down college in 2001 and transitioned to the military, and those guys went off, and while I was in the Navy, some of them became doctors and they did great things. And I look at what I've done in those years since, and, I'm in that healthcare world. I own clinics. I work as a public speaker. I have a book out, and all of that would not have happened had I not challenged myself in the military. I think there's a lot of positives to that. And I think, if you ever doubt that, just look at Johnny Kim. He's an astronaut right now.
Let's talk a bit about, you have a charity, Hunting for Healing.
I do. My partner in crime helped us start it. My wife, Lindsay. She's really been, we talked about transition. She's been my swim buddy. As I got out, in the teams, you always have a swim buddy while you're in. Well, when I got out, the teams weren't right there because they're in Virginia or California, and I was in Connecticut. And Lindsay was really, she picked up a lot of that slack, and we have a great relationship. We communicate a lot. And one of the things I like to do in my off time is to hunt. I love to hunt and fish. I grew up fishing a lot, got into hunting while I was in the military. I do a lot of those, both of those a lot to this day. And one of the trips that I took her on was to Africa. I've been to Africa before, and the first time I went was in 2012, and I wanted to bring my wife on the next trip. So I did in 2014, and she got to see why I like to hunt. It's not just shooting the animal, it's the preparation process, it's the deer camp, it's the stories, it's the hunts, it's coming back, and the whole, event. And she felt that was a powerful experience where we got off the grid in Africa, we communicated, we wrote this book, we started writing this book, and she harvested an animal, and she felt that this would be a great connection for spouses and veterans. And we launched Hunting for Healing, which is a 501c3 charity. We take veterans and their spouses on hunting, fishing, outdoor activities. We recently got back from a 7-day plains antelope hunt in Africa. That was our main goal when we started this, was to go back to Africa and share that experience. And we were able to do that 2 years later. We took an Army veteran, he was a Ranger, lost both his legs, and an Air Force EOD veteran, him and his spouse, took them and their spouses to Africa. They hunted. We've been to Costa Rica, catching billfish and tuna. Been to Chalmette, Louisiana, duck hunting. Been alligator hunting in Louisiana. We've got a bunch of trips in the near future, and a bunch of veterans that we've been taking out. It's been super rewarding, for me, but I know even more so for Lindsay, and she's really taken it as her passion project and has done great things.
Do you have a website for that if people want to learn more or perhaps donate?
You can check all this stuff out at www.kevinlace.com. That'll have information and links to our charity, which is Hunting for Healing. So it's www.huntingforhealing.org. And you can learn more about the organization. You can go ahead and donate. And even importantly, you can go ahead and take those applications and pass them out to veterans that that could benefit from some of our trips. We're a very small charity. We have a couple of 2 SEALs that I worked with, the one that is from New Jersey on the board, and another friend of mine, and then an Air Force pilot and former Air Forceman, and then an airman and a local firefighter. So we're all very active, and we look forward to taking more vets on the trips.
I was joined today by Kevin Lace, the author of The Last Punisher, a SEAL Team 3 sniper's true account of the Battle of Ramadi. Kevin, thanks for what you've done for the country, and thanks for coming on my podcast today.
Bruce, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
I want to thank Kevin Lace for coming on the program today. We will have a link to his book, The Last Punisher, on the website at www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com. Also remember his charity, huntingforhealing.org, and you go to that website, both if you want to donate and help out the project, or if you want to get an application that you can hand to a veteran that you might know. Thanks for listening.